Hello everyone and welcome back to today's webinar. So today we're looking at hardware asset management policies and processes, doing a bit of an introduction and having a look at some of the core key HAM processes and policies that are really quite simple on paper to create and implement, but that will make a huge difference to your organization if you were to look at implementing these. So first of all, let's have a look at the agenda. We've got a different avenue streams that we're going to focus on here. First of all, looking at those core hardware asset management policies, and then we're going to have a look into the HAM processes, how you can communicate with them, what the core processes are, and a quick summary of some additional ones as well that I highly recommend implementing if you're doing hardware asset management or ITAM. And finally, we'll do a bit of a summary at the end, a bit of a roundup. So first of all, let's have a look at our HAM policies. So what is a hardware asset management policy? And it's basically a principle that has been defined by the organization to ensure the correct usage and management of physical hardware assets throughout their life cycle. Now, it's very important to mention here that the hardware asset management scope for you may be different for another organization. It's what is considered a hardware asset within your organization. Some people may consider things like drones as a hardware asset because that's the nature of your business. Other people might not consider monitors as a hardware asset, but you do. You can see where I'm getting at here. The scope, it changes depending on your organization, your industry, your size, etc. So the HAM policy is primarily looking at the hardware assets within scope. It can also be considered as a statement of intent with regards to the do's and don'ts associated with hardware consumption. Now, I always tell organizations and clients that the policy is what you can hang your hat on. This is that central document that dictates how you are going to do IT asset management, and in this case, hardware asset management. This is the policy that all of the users, your key stakeholders, will need to read, understand and follow, and the accompanying processes will need to support it. So this is a really important document. Doesn't need to be war and peace. It can be detailed, doesn't need to be 20 odd pages long. I'm going to have a look at that in a second. But yeah, really important document. If you're going to do anything first, start with your policies because that will dictate the tone and nature of your HAM processes that you then want to implement. But who exactly is the HAM policy aimed at? First of all, your senior management. Your senior management are going to want to know what you're managing and how you're managing it and who is accountable for it. They also may want to know about the performance of the hardware assets that you're managing. There's nothing worse than having an aged fleet of hardware that just simply isn't fit for purpose anymore, that's making software run slowly, that's making, really easy BAU actions just take an age to do. So senior management have a keen interest in this, in understanding what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what the benefit is to the organization. The IT asset type owners. Now, 9 times out of 10, you do not have a big enough ITAM team to be able to manage all of the hardware assets within the scope. So you designate IT asset type owners. For example, your network team, your network manager, they may be the IT asset type owner for your switches and your routers. Your infrastructure team, the physical servers, the end user technologies team, the desktops and the laptops. You may even have a telephony team that's responsible for the mobiles and tablets. You see where I'm getting with this? It's a great way of expanding your ITAM team without actually expanding your ITAM team, if that makes sense. But they are a key stakeholder and a key audience member for your HAM policies. Your end users, your customers, those people who are using company-owned assets on a daily basis, they are a critical audience member for this policy because you're going to be holding them to account for that. When they join the organization and they've signed one of the policies, which we'll look at in a second, they will have agreed to certain things when it comes to hardware they've been provided. So they need to be able to understand these policies. It needs to be in English and not in ITAM jargon with ITAM acronyms left, right and center. It needs to be easy to understand and follow. Your fixed asset and finance teams are another good audience member. So these are the people that track the asset throughout its life cycle from a depreciation and a write-off perspective. and also the finance teams from a budget standpoint, and your audit teams. Yes. Your internal audit teams will have a keen interest in your policies because they want evidences that they are being followed. Yes, fun stuff. If you ever had an internal audit, they will come after you for ITAM, just like you can be externally audited for ITAM as well, looking at your processes, your controls, your data sets, etc. Not even looking at the compliance side of things, but you can be audited for ITAM. So typical ITAM policy, I do not like I said, to do war and peace. I like shorter policies that are easier to digest and are very clear and bullet point to the point. You can go by more than 1 or 2 pages, but ideally it would be great to have it on 1 or 2 pages. If you go over that, maybe consider appendixes for more information, but get your key critical information in those first 2 pages. It shouldn't be war and peace. Short and sweet is great. Clear and concise, to the point. Get rid of all the waffle, all the acronyms, all of that. Do not overload it with ITAM terminology and acronyms. Make sure you've detailed who owns the process. Should be your ITAM team. Do not overcomplicate it, because you're going to have to review this on a regular basis to make sure it's still fit for purpose. That becomes an absolute nightmare if you're having to do 20 pages every quarter. It's not something you're going to be doing, let's be honest. So if you keep it short and sweet and concise, easier to update, easier to make sure it's still relevant for your organization, easier to make sure that's still fit for purpose, and make sure it's published somewhere for all customers to view, all of your stakeholders, senior management and users. This document should not be hidden away. This is a public-facing document. There is absolutely nothing to hide behind. Another critical policy is your hardware acceptable use one. And this is what I was referring to earlier when I was talking about a document that your end users should be signing and should be adhering to. So your acceptable use policy is basically an agreement between you, the organization, and your end users that you're providing the equipment for, and how they are going to look after it through its life cycle, and what you're expecting of them. You can see another example there that I use really often, because again, the acceptable use policy does not have to be war and peace. It doesn't have to be long. It can actually be quite short, sweet, and to the point. I would highly recommend that you get this document signed by the user you're deploying the hardware to, whether that's when they join as part of the joiners, movers, leavers process, or whether that's during the hardware refresh process, when you're refreshing their old asset and giving them a new one. So you can see a really good example there of what it should look like. Feel free to have a look at that. So this immediately defines the scope as anyone in possession of a company asset. The primary focus for this is on end user technology based assets such as laptops, mobiles and tablets, because they're the one you're actually giving out to an end user. It's easy to understand. We are using clear terms on the do's and don'ts of what you can and cannot do. Important to have an escalation point in there as well. So it's great having this on paper, but if no one's enforcing it, if no one's calling anyone out in the event that they breach the acceptable use policy, then it's not, it just kind of a meh thing really, isn't it? If you've got no one enforcing it, no one backing you up, no escalation point, then it's great. We've signed this document. It doesn't actually mean anything because no one's going to do anything if we don't follow it. So it's important to flag that you have an escalation point in there. And finally, like we said, make sure that they sign this policy. This can be done digitally or it can be done physically. And it can also be part of the hardware ownership verification process as well. A great audit point to go back to and say, nope, yeah, we definitely gave you this laptop on this date. You signed it. So where is it? We can't see it coming into our AMDB, for example. So when you're building out your policies, it's important that you get key stakeholders and people to have a look at it and approve it. This includes your senior management and your senior management ITAM sponsors, your IT asset type owners, ITAM itself, although you've created it, but it still needs approval, service management, HR, finance, internal risk and control, aka your audit teams, and also your document management or policy controllers. Now, the final ones, they're the type of people that are looking to make sure it's got the right template, the right format for the policy, the right language, the right words, the right font size, all of that kind of stuff. And they're typically usually the final hurdle. Once you've got the approval from all the other guys and girls, you've updated your policy based on their feedback to make sure it fits everyone. The last step is that document management policy controllers who then go through and get the red pen out and say, nope, this is the wrong language. Nope, this is the wrong font. No, this is the wrong font size, etc. And once you've had all of the approvals signed off, the next step is to get the message out there. Personal favourite of mine is hosting workshops and deep dive sessions with key stakeholders to introduce and explain the HAM policies. Smaller audiences, more personable, more kind of on a 1-to-3, 1-to-4 ratio so that they don't feel overwhelmed in asking questions. You don't feel overwhelmed by the sheer amount of people that have joined it. Make sure that you record any of these as well and store them centrally within your ITAM SharePoint page or your ITAM Confluence or whatever you're using to promote all of the awesome work that you're doing within IT asset management. Blogs and articles, it's an interesting one. Some people still like the written word. I'm finding that videos and stuff like that work a lot better with the new generation of ITAM professional coming in. But if your organization still wants written guidance, go ahead, post a blog. Get on the intranet page, get on the IT monthly newsletter, do whatever you need to do to get your message out there about these new policies that are in place. Explain it in layman's terms, no technical ITAM lingo. Said it once, I'll say it multiple times. You're far more likely to get people to adopt your policy and your processes if you make it clear, easy to understand, easy to follow. Putting loads of ITAM terminology and acronyms, it's not going to work. I like to make it, like I said, with the recording workshops and have, smaller deep dive sessions. I also like to find personal examples that will help key stakeholders to show how this policy is going to help them as well. So, for example, if I'm talking to the security team, the InfoSec team, I'll go through the policy in advance and make sure that I highlight a few areas that I think will be massively beneficial to them as well as for ITAM. So now let's look at some of the basic hardware asset management processes. These are really basic, really core, really standardized. They're not earth-shattering, groundbreaking stuff, but this just to give you a bit of an idea of it. So let's first of all look at the aim of what we're trying to achieve here by implementing processes. We need to make sure we have best practice controls to manage hardware assets throughout their life cycle. We're trying to provide that guidance and governance to the stakeholders on how we're managing those assets. We need to have the controls and evidence that those controls are in place and working. Think back to the internal audit. And also for ITAM as well, to show that what you've built, what you've developed is actually working through actual tangible data, or a reduction in number of service desk tickets, or the reduction in the number of failures from legacy hardware. That kind of thing, so that you've got evidence. A reference point to understand if these HAM processes and controls are actually working. Because if they're not working, you've got a problem. You've got to go back, you've got to reinvent the process or the policy to make sure it's fit for purpose. Otherwise, they are just pixels on a screen. And all of your policies and processes really help streamline ITAM. It really helps wrap everything together so that you can optimize and manage your hardware assets throughout their life cycle. So we have got a number of core best practice HAM processes, and the ones in orange are the ones that we're going to have a bit more of a deep dive and a focus on. We've got the request process, we've got procurement, provisioning, stock management, loans, repairs, reclaim and reuse. Love that one, personal favorite. Moves, lost and stolen process, really important. Ownership transfer and verification, another personal favorite. Levers, unbelievably important. This one, making sure you're getting equipment back from levers, is actually a lot harder than it should be. Under investigation process, where you're a detective, again, personal favorite, love that one. A process that has really come out of the woodwork has been unbelievably important since the events of 2020 and the viruses, is the retirement and ITAD process. Fantastic process, super high value process. And we'll mention that in a second as to why. And without all of these processes and controls, you won't know that you're covering a lot of your estate without that inventory coverage process. Often overlooked. Not going to lie, I often find this one overlooked, that people implement everything else to do with the day-to-day BAU running, and then you go, okay, prove to me that you've got all of your data in there. Ooh, we can't. Why are you not checking that your inventory coverage in the AIMDB is what it should be? Didn't think we needed to. I thought all of the APIs and connectors coming into my AIMDB were working and were fine, but you don't know what you don't know. So cover yourself. Hardware inventory coverage process, really good process. And I've added hardware donation process on as a core one, although unfortunately it's getting less and less as a core process simply because we're in tough economic times. ITAD gives you financial value for the asset at the end of the life. So we're actually seeing that organizations are donating less and less because they need that value back from ITAD to put back in their hardware budgeting. However, I know this is a core process for some organizations, so we'll throw it in there anyway, but this is kind of a core for some organizations, not so much for others. Now, first of all, let's have a look at the hardware request process. And in all of these, there will be a really basic flow on the left-hand side, but we'll focus on the AIM key points and where this leads in the process cycle. As you can see, big fan of swim lanes, okay? Love swim lanes. Whether that's in Miro or in Visio or whatever else, swim lanes. Clear, easy, concise, you know who's responsible for what. Stakeholders left-hand side, swim lanes coming off it. Yeah, just clean. Clean, easy, really easy to follow and understand. You can also see in these processes, I reference other process where this leads on to, which is like the procurement process, provisioning, and inventory coverage reports as well. So yeah, all of these processes are interlinked and they're all working towards that lifecycle management. So anyway, the aim for the hardware request process is to ensure all hardware is requested via the correct channels with all the required information justification. Key points here, make sure you're checking if a user has an existing asset assigned to them from the same asset type. AKA, someone's put a request in for another phone. They've already got one assigned in the AIMDB. Why are you requesting another phone? You don't need it. Ensure they've got justification, cost center, and management approval. Complete waste of time in following any of this stuff. If the line manager actually says no, they don't have it or they don't have budget for it, it's a waste of your time. It's a waste of their time. Make sure you get that in place early doors and check the stock management process before buying anything new. Always check stock before buying new. This process then feeds in nicely into the provisioning process or the procurement process if you don't have stock and the request has been approved. Have a look at the process flow. Feel free to pause the video at each of these process steps so you can look at the flow. But yeah, these are very basic. You can go into real detail in these. You can automate them and all that kind of stuff. But this is just a basic overview of what the process is. Procurement process. So this is to make sure that hardware is procured when required and that all procurement data is logged in the AIMDB. Another point of this is to make sure as well you're purchasing via correct sellers or hardware providers. For example, if you're buying Apple devices, it's via an Apple authorized reseller so that it can go into your Apple Business Manager and that you're buying through approved hardware resellers for that particular vendor or directly with the vendor itself. Key points, make sure there is sign off from both a financial perspective and also that justification. Critical before you actually go and press the button to order. The AIMDB can be updated before the asset goes online, by the way, as part of the hardware goods received and as part of the procurement process by having the vendor send you the procurement information for the asset before or during when they're shipping it to you. So we have a process in place with all of the clients that we don't wait for tools to come in and discover the device and add it into the AIMDB. What we do instead is when it's shipped, we request the serial numbers, the PO, the cost, the order date, etc., so that we can add that into the AIMDB before the device hits us. Until it hits us, it goes to in transit, but we make sure all the procurement information and financial information is in there. It just gives you a head start. It really does give you a really good head start. And then once you've gone through the procurement process, this process flows nicely into hardware provisioning or stock management. Stock management, if you're just replenishing stock because you've reached your threshold minimums, or provisioning if you're literally buying hardware to meet requests. Speaking of stock management, I actually like to have more than one area of the stock management process. One of those is the buffer levels to make sure that you're not going below the threshold of what you need to run in a BAU standpoint. And the other one is the physical stock checks itself. So, but the overall purpose of a stock management process is to effectively manage your hardware assets that are in stock, maintain that buffer stock to ensure you do not run low. The last thing that you want to do is run out of devices and have someone screaming or not being able to work because you don't have a spare in stock. Obviously, another aim of this is to make sure you're updating the AMDB as well. This is your asset management database. We've done loads of videos on the AMDB. This is a critical part of your stock management process. You can automate a lot of this, including automating the threshold levels and automating ordering hardware as well when you reach that threshold minimum. Always flag any assets that are not fit for reuse or repurpose that are in stock. Put them as in stock pending disposal, or whatever this equivalent is within your organization. These ones should not be used under any circumstances. They should be ready for disposal and ITAD. Stock management can actually can follow a number of different processes. So we've given the example here of the IT asset provisioning, but stock management flows into a lot of other processes, including procurement if you've not got enough stuff in there, and can also go into the under investigation process. If you're doing a stock check and your AMDB says you've got 10 laptops in stock and you can only find 9, under investigation kicks off to find out where that 10th one has gone. I am very OCD with stock rooms. I like it to be all neat and tidy. Here's a brilliantly designed image from Visio that I created. I'm sure you can appreciate it. It's beautiful. Of a suggested stockroom layout. You may not have 2 doors, but hopefully you get the idea of it. You know, pending evaluation, stuff you've received in on the left, then disposal there, stock ready for being rebuilt, and then stock ready for deployment. Make sure that they are clearly identified and marked within your stock room so that people don't accidentally take one from the wrong shelf and give it out when it's pending disposal, or it's been retired, or it's pending repairs, etc. And then that stock ready for deployment, make sure that the first one that comes in is then the first out. So make sure that the one that's been in stock the longest gets shipped out as soon as you can, so that you can still get some value of that asset during its life cycle. One of my favorite ones, the reclaim and reuse. This can also be called like an internal audit process, if you like. This is basically where we're doing what we do with software, but looking for hardware that has been inactive over a period of time. We do these on a 30-day time span, so that if it's been inactive after 30 days, we're going out and auditing it very much like we would for software. So the aim here is to make sure that we're using and really utilizing and maximizing all of the hardware that we've got deployed. And if we don't, finding out why it's not being used correctly, why it's not being used effectively, why it's just stagnant. It may be in this case that actually it's an inventory client issue where the device isn't communicating home and it is being used. It may be that it's been put in a cupboard and people have forgotten about it and not followed the process and returned it back to IT. It may be because it's used only for specific actions at certain times of the year. This happens a lot in retail organizations and a lot in organizations that have certain campaigns that require more iPads, for example, or a MacBook or something like that. So there are reasons for it. But basically, what you should be looking at is the last discovered dates or last seen dates. If you don't have a dedicated ITAM tool, you can look at this from things like SECM, Intune, Jam, even some security tools show that. Check with the user first. It may be a valid reason as to why that asset isn't being used. All reclaimed assets must go into stock first so that they can be rebuilt and put in the provisioning process. I'm not a fan of when line managers take an asset, whether that's from a lever or from someone else, and say, don't worry, we'll deploy it out. No, you won't. It needs to come back in. It needs to be completely refreshed. All of the licenses need to be removed, unassigned. It needs to have the image re-put onto the device so that it's basically a new device for the next person that uses it. The amount of organizations that over-license because of this particular reason is crazy. So make sure that if there's anything that's dormant out there that's just sat in a cupboard, get it back into IT, at least refresh it, remove all of the licensable software on it, and then the user can reuse it again as and when they need to for the campaign or that specific action point. The leavers process is a really tricky one, one that actually requires so much support from HR, because if you don't get support from HR, it kind of fails, and it fails a lot. So the primary aim for this, obviously, is to make sure that hardware is returned from people when they leave the organization. There's a lot of things that you can do from an ITAM perspective. First of all, you need that leaver information from HR. If you're not getting that, there's no process for that, you're screwed. And a lot of it is then retrospective, and it's so much harder to try and get equipment back when someone has left the organization than getting it before they leave. So if you do have that information, send reminders to the leaver and line manager in advance of their leave date, highlighting the equipment you're expecting back. Update your asset management database to ensure that you know when it's being returned, so in use, pending returns, and a date on when you're expecting it to be back. When you do get it back, make sure you're updating the AMDB immediately to in stock so that it doesn't trigger any secondary processes or escalation processes. If the asset isn't returned, it needs to go down to the leavers line manager. They are responsible. It's HR and the line manager then to take this forward. And yet, a HR escalation process is really critical here as well if you're not receiving assets back. Ultimately, if someone leaves the organization and doesn't return their kit, it's theft. It is a piece of equipment that you have provided. It is not for them to keep. If they go walkies with it and don't return it, it's theft at the end of the day. You can get money back from their final paycheck. If that's already happened, then you need to work with HR to look at legal and security reasons. Leavers leaving with equipment is a massive security risk, so get security involved as well. Once you're comfortable with your leavers process, you can automate a lot of this as well using workflows where the email goes out automatically, where the reclaim happens automatically, where the user checks the device back in automatically, etc. But again, you're really reliant on having that accurate HR data. And unfortunately, a lot of the times HR don't have accurate data, or they don't have the data for temporary workers like contractors and consultants, so they slip through the net. Something to consider, and something that, highly recommended that you build out a process that encompasses both full-time employees and your temporary workers and consultants and contractors and all of that fun stuff. So one of my favorites is hardware under investigation process. This is typically when something has gone AWOL. This is typically when you can't find something in stock and you need to go and hunt it down. It's really quite rewarding when you do find the asset that you've been trying to hunt down. Not so rewarding if you can't find it though. So this is to find assets that haven't been online for a set period of time. This actually may have come from that reuse and reclaim process. And needs to be investigated. Basically, we're looking at the last discovered date again to see which ones that are missing. We're looking at that audit report from the internal audit that we've done. If the asset is still required, we highly suggest that it connects to the network regularly, at least once every 30 days, to get that updated inventory record so that it doesn't keep hitting the audits. Or if it's no longer required, bring it back in, update the AMDB, or if it's missing, follow the lost or stolen process, or go back to the reclaim part of the reclaim and reuse process. You can automate this a lot as well, and I love getting to the point where an organization is comfortable with the process that they want to automate it, because it takes away a lot of pain and a lot of manual mail merging and stuff from an ITAM standpoint. You can create workflows for this so that once the device hits day 31, an automated email goes out to the assigned user and the assigned user's line manager, or the asset type owner, whichever you want. Once it checks in, that's it. The audit finishes, it starts the loop again. If it hasn't been seen for another 5 working days, a second chaser goes out with escalation points. And if it still hasn't been found after 40 days, then a real escalation point kicks in again. That is when the line manager comes in. That's when it is the final reminder being sent. If there's still no reply from the line manager, the user, the IT asset type owner, and the device hasn't come back in online, then we go through the escalation processes, including, in some cases, the HR escalation process. The fact that this is automated, you get that report. You don't have to do all of the legwork that's on that kind of middle to left-hand side of the process. You get a report every month that shows the ones that haven't communicated, that haven't replied to the workflow, so that you literally have your target list of ones that are a full breach of this process. That saves a lot of time and a lot of energy on the ITAM side of things. Retirement and ITAD, this has seen a huge resurgence lately, mainly because organisations need money. They need money for their hardware budgets. They need money for hardware refreshes, etc. But there's also a compliance element of this: disposal certificates, data destruction references and evidences, corporate green IT responsibilities and ESG responsibilities, e-waste, landfill, there's all sorts of things that this policy covers, and it's a really, really critical process, not policy, it's a critical process in modern day ITAM. The main aim obviously is to make sure that all hardware assets are disposed of correctly. Either that's at the end of their life or end of economical repair. We need to make sure that all data is wiped. If the data cannot be wiped by a tool like Blanco, it's got to be crushed. It's got to be crushed. There's no point in running the risk of having a data breach or a data leak. For a couple of £100 or a couple of €100, just crush the hard drive, be done with it. There's also the recycling element of all of the materials. There's also the audit history of that data destruction reference, the disposal certificates, making sure that they're following ISO standards, make sure you're following that green IT, and you may have internal green IT and ESG goals and objectives that you're to do. And hardware retirement and ITAD plays a key role in this. ITAD is huge as well in that you're able to get a little bit of money back at the end of its life. In some cases, like with MacBooks in particular, they really do hold their value quite nicely. So you can get quite a large chunk of change against your next hardware budget. So that's why this one's become a really popular process rather than just straight up retirement. And ITAD is actually thinking more strategically and getting money back for your equipment at the end of their life. And of course, a huge part of this is making sure that you're updating the AIMDB. Nothing worse than trying to find assets that are listed as in stock or in use that you've actually disposed of or resold through ITAD. So yeah, making sure you're updating the AIMDB is a critical part of this. Making sure you're getting all of that documentation when you dispose, when you do the data destruction, when you resell, updating the AIMDB, attaching all of those references to the asset, and you'll have a really robust end-of-life process. This is actually one of the ones as well that auditors tend to audit and look for evidences, because there's a lot of governmental directives in the EU, in the Americas, in the UAE, etc., that require evidence that you are taking it seriously and that you are following the ISO standards and all of the other e-waste and electronic waste standards. We're also looking at the one that I mentioned earlier about the inventory coverage percentage. How do you know that you're covering all of your estate if you're not looking at the tools that are feeding your AIMDB? World class is 95% inventory coverage within your AIMDB. You do this by comparing all of the other tools that are providing your AIMDB with the data. There's a lot of reports you can build in tools like ServiceNow where you can see the integrations that are coming in, that are updating, that are creating assets, that are updating CIs, etc. But getting reports directly from those as well shows you the difference on where you're missing. Things like Intune as well, with phones and iPads, making sure that they're enrolled as a corporate device rather than personal. That can uncover a lot of assets that you haven't had reporting incorrectly. Also getting some tools from the InfoSec team as well. Just give you that peace of mind to show that your AIMDB does have that high level of coverage so that you then have way more effective processes and controls. So the aim here is to make sure and to try and achieve that 95% plus inventory coverage. Key points here, using the AIMDB as the base. So AIMDB is your central source and you are comparing it with all these other data feeds that are coming in. But the AIMDB, that is your focus. That is your golden record that you're trying to make a golden record. You're getting the reports from all those data sources so you can do a comparison and see what is in there, what isn't in there. If it's not in there, why? Why is it not in there? Is it an agent issue? Is it an inventory issue? Is it a firewall issue? Is it in a DMZ? What's the issue? How can we get this into the AIMDB? We may even need to manually create it. And if so, absolutely fine. Get it manually added in there with a note to say that you can't get the inventory from this. This is a really great key performance indicator, KPI, to show how ham is going on the reporting and how much visibility and transparency of your estate you actually have. And I typically see organizations and recommend that you include this as part of your monthly ITAM reporting pack, because the more inventory coverage you're getting, the more you're also seeing on the SaaS side of things, on the software that's installed, the licensing, etc. Everyone's a winner if you're doing this process and then making sure that those that aren't in the AMDB are coming into the AMDB. Your next action from this is if there's anything that is not reported in other inventory tools, investigate as to why and make sure why that's happening and make it happen that it comes into the AMDB. There are some additional core processes that we haven't done a deep dive in that, again, I highly recommend that you have a look at and take into consideration. We've got hardware provisioning. So how is an asset physically provisioned? Do you send it home to a user? Should it already have the standard image? Asset tagging, be logged in the AMDB before given out to a user? All of those kind of parameters. There should also be a hardware asset tagging process as well, if that's a big thing for you. Some organizations have this where the hardware provider actually provides the equipment with your asset tag already on there. Other organizations do it in-house. Also got the hardware loans process, the repairs process, moves, which is if something is moving internally, you've got it back from a lever, it needs to be reprovisioned to a new starter. How are you managing that? Lost and stolen, so make sure that you're getting crime reference numbers, that you're informing information security, remotely securing or remotely wiping a device. That's a really a big one as well. The ownership and verification process, I love this process. You can either do this manually or automated. Manually just gets people to confirm the asset that they still have. Automated, your ITSM tool, your ServiceNow, whatever you're using, goes out and automatically verifies every 30 days, every 60 days by asking the user a prompt every time they log in to say, do you have these devices? Yes or no. If no, a ticket goes to ITAM to investigate why. If yes, you can create a custom field on the asset or the user to update when that last audit happened. And this is such a really cool process for keeping your AMDB up to date and your hardware asset management, really nailed. And we mentioned about the donation process. This is making sure that you've got things like waivers in place, a process for wiping the devices. If you can't wipe the device, removing the hard drive, putting a new one in, and all of that kind of stuff. But unfortunately, this is kind of losing its importance now as organizations look to get more money at the end of the life, because not a lot of organizations are cash rich and have loads of money for hardware refresh budgets. So they need to subsidize that through the ITAD process. I always suggest that when you're implementing these processes that you walk in your end users and your customers' shoes. Go through all of the processes yourself before that final implementation and before you start shouting about it. Did everything go to plan? Was anything complicated? Did anything not work? Is anything not clear? Could you make it clearer? Could you make it easier? Once they do go live, very much like the policies, host webinars, write blogs, have one-to-one sessions, do whatever you need to do to make the process aware for everyone out there. There's no such thing as over-communication when it comes to these things. When implementing some of these processes, it may be a big culture change for your end users. Make sure you're guiding them through that change and be patient. There may be people within the organization that have been there 20, 30 years. They may be used to just going and tapping John on the shoulder and getting a new phone, a new laptop, getting them to have a look at fixing something. It might be a big culture change for them. So make sure that you're patient with them and go through the benefits of why you're implementing what you're implementing. Create key performance indicators as part of your ITAM monthly pack to show how effective your ham processes are. These will also then help you improve them to be more efficient and more effective and give you a focus area on what needs to be improved within your organization. If they're working and working really well, shout about it. Shout about your successes. Shout about ham successes to anyone and everyone within the organization. I've put up posters before showing how much money we've saved during an internal audit, or that there's a hardware refresh coming, and here's all the benefits of the new device you're getting, and here's how much we sold the old equipment for, and here's the green IT ESG stats from all of the ITAD we've been doing. Things like that. Really shout about the successes that you're doing out there. So, in summary, the hardware related policies give you the power to enforce the way in which you want to manage and control your hardware assets. The policies need to be reviewed regularly to ensure they're still fit for purpose. Those processes provide the guidance to customers and stakeholders to ensure that you are effective with your hardware asset management. Don't overcomplicate things or make it hard for customers to request hardware. Processes also need to be reviewed regularly to ensure they're effective and being followed and are still relevant. And shout about it. Really over communicate. Let them know about your policies and processes. Let them know that they're there, why they're there, and that if they need any clarification or need any help, they can go to the ITAM team. So I really hope you found that useful. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next up, we're going to be having a look at the additional supporting documentation. So your rating matrices, your work instructions, your knowledge articles, and any video guides and stuff like that that can really help accentuate the processes and policies that you're implementing and make sure that people follow them. So really hope you found this useful. Really hope to see you next time, and happy ITAMing.